I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good afternoon. Welcome to your Innovation Technology General Services Committee. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilmember Mitch O'Farrell. Fortunately, Councilmember Bonin will not be joining us today. Mr. Villanueva, are there any general public comment cards?
We don't have any, sir. None.
Okay, no public comment cards. I'm going to recommend that items 7 and 8 be continued until January without discussion. Without objection, that is so ordered. I also want to recommend that items 10 through 19 be approved on consent. Are there any cards on these items?
None, sir.
No cards on that items. Without objection?
No objection.
10 through 19 will be on consent. I want to make a point, if anyone's here for our special agenda item, that will be taken up no sooner than 3:45 because that's when that one was noticed, the special regarding the fire. So that the earliest that will be taken up is 3:45. In terms of the other ones, we had a request because of some scheduling issues to take up number 9 first. So I would like to honor that request.
Yes, sir.
And move to item 9. Mr. Villanueva, if you would read item 9 into the
Yes,
record.
sir. Item number 9 is a CEO report relative to the Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit's recommendation for the evaluation of city properties for city use and economic development. This item is also referred to the Economic Development Committee.
Great. And are there any cards on this item?
None, sir.
Okay. So call the CAO to the table, and if you could.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee member. My name is Josh Romer in the CAO's office. I very much appreciate you taking this item first for the scheduling issues. The item before you, number 9, contains various actions to establish a clear city process to evaluate and identify city properties that are opportunities for reuse and economic development. The Council established the Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit, AMSP, in the Office of the CAO to provide the framework for and perform preliminary analysis of the city's asset management planning needs. The city currently has a somewhat ad hoc approach in terms of determining how to potentially reuse city properties. So the goal of the process proposed by AMSP, the goals are to provide a clear process for evaluation informed by a documented analysis, to provide a way for the city to identify properties for economic development, for which the city has recently expanded its abilities through the Economic and Workforce Development Department, and also to be responsive to council and department objectives, but also provide for the city having a proactive way to approach its planning for its own asset management needs and potential economic development. If adopted, in the future, the consideration for the reuse of city properties, including for economic development, joint use, nonprofit leases, surplus disposition, etc., would be initiated by council motion and directed to CAO's Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit. AMSP would be coordinating with the affected departments, EWDD, GSD, CLA, and the affected council office, and prepare recommendations for consideration by the city's Municipal Facilities Committee. It's an existing committee composed of the mayor's, CLA, and CAO, that already evaluates the city's reuse of its own properties, generally for municipal purposes. So this is talking about also adding to that economic development perspective. The report would go to MFC for their deliberation, and MFC's recommendations would go on to council for consideration. The report also recommends the establishment of an economic development trust fund, so that the proceeds of properties that are sold for economic development purposes by EWDD go into a segregated citywide account that can be used to pay for economic development programs and projects that are developed by Economic and Workforce Development Department. We have a request for EWDD, if approved, to come back with proposed expenditure guidelines and for how the funds could be programmed for such a trust fund. We also request a report from EWDD regarding staffing considerations to implement their economic development work program, given that it's a relatively new department that's ramping up. And through this process, we would be basically identifying projects for them to work on and properties for them to implement in the future. And finally, we propose appointing the Economic and Workforce Development Department General Manager as a non-voting member of the Municipal Facilities Committee. As I mentioned, the committee is currently the CLA, CAO, and the mayor, and we think it makes sense to have the perspective of EWD at the table when we're considering projects like this. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Great, thanks. Before we do that, I realize I don't think I mentioned in my opening about items 7 and 8. Did I mention that? That's the Avasant and ITA strategic plan, and we originally had that as a placeholder, but
Yeah.
did I mention we're continuing that to next? Okay, I want to be clear about that. Great. So back to the item. I didn't know if I mentioned. To help us understand sort of concretely, could you walk us through the process? Okay, surplus land, surplus city property comes available. Walk us through the process. What would happen under the old system and what would happen under the new system for, a particular parcel X, we call it.
Okay, so it's a good question. So part of the purpose here is to add on to what the current process is. So the city has a pretty well established process for how you treat a surplus property. And currently, how you would treat what's a surplus property is that a council motion would ask the General Services Department to basically administer the surplus property requirements. So the city...
First, it has to be deemed surplus, right?
There was a process to deem something surplus. So basically, the initial motion basically asked GSD to go through the surplus, to initiate the surplus process.
Okay.
And it could take, I'd say, 9 months to a year is probably a standard, but it can be a complicated process and it can be a prolonged one. So generally, a motion initiates the process to surplus a property. GSD has a long list of things they have to do, both on the city side to make sure that no other city department actually has use for that property. There's also statutory requirements on the state level that they have to offer it to other public agencies, including and affordable housing for potential reuse by another public agency. Once GSD does all those, they submit a report. They collect reports from planning, Bureau of Engineering, a host of other departments that basically weigh in on this.
None of that's changing.
That's not changing. So that's an existing process that will remain. So this is basically, alongside that, adding a different proposed process for how an economic development property could be disposed of. So one of the important provisions of the ordinance that created EWDD is that it gives them the ability to sell properties not going through that whole surplus process, but instead to do a somewhat streamlined process as long as they can show that the sale of the property is benefiting the city for economic development purposes. And that allows them to kind of shortcut offering the property to other public agencies. But that's a totally separate process. And so this is kind of the ordinance that created EWD imagines this process, but doesn't outline exactly how it would work. It doesn't specify, well, what exactly is an economic development property. So this framework is kind of meant to overlap the existing surplus process, but also add to it economic development and establish the process to do that. And I think it's
separate
also
and apart from what what economic development already has. You're saying they can already go one route
the ordinance gives them the authority to do that, but the city hasn't established procedures for how they would go about doing that, or how they would. The ordinance that established EWDD basically gives them jurisdiction over and ability to dispose of properties that are designated for economic development. The process proposed here is how the city identifies properties for economic development.
Okay. So the ordinance, it's never been used.
Has not yet been exercised.
Okay. So now we're working toward how do we exercise that property or that authority given parcel X that is deemed surplus, or in this case it's deemed surplus with an economic development opportunity.
Or it's unused, and because surplus has a very specific definition in the admin code. But yeah, if we have a leftover parcel that we know the city doesn't have use for it, but we could either surplus it through the normal surplus procedures, or we could sell it for economic development. And so this provides for how the city designates properties for economic development, but it also kind of gives us very early on in the process, if we're thinking about a property, to consider which properties that we might now think, oh, we have this leftover fire station, which happens frequently in the city. Should we give it to a nonprofit? This establishes very, very early on in the process a way that we can evaluate whether maybe it has economic development capacity, and that the city could benefit in a different way, in a way that the city hasn't uniformly explored the reuse of its properties in the past.
And so this would be after you go through the first. So for the surplus fire station, for example, there's one in my district. Fire station moves to a new place. Property is now available. City then has to go through the process of offering it to all the different city agencies. Is that correct?
If the council office, if it seems they have economic development, we could avoid the surplus process and instead the city could determine that it's an economic development property. And instead of going through the surplus process, EWDD would basically have jurisdiction over the property, and they would go through implementing, finding a developer and doing that negotiation.
And at that fork in the road to determine which way it goes.
And and the point is to establish the fork in the road relatively early in the process, so that the city, have all the stakeholders that make sense at the table, the council member, the departments, to relatively early on be able to make a reasoned decision about what's the best use for a property before we do a lot of work.
Okay, and so how is that fork going to work? Or is it under this proposal? Or is that determined?
So a motion would come from a council office proposing that there is a property in the district that is unused and you want to have it considered for economic development purposes. That motion would go to Asset Management Strategic Planning Group. We would coordinate an evaluation of the property with EWD, GSD, the relative departments, and come up with a reasoned recommendation for what we think makes sense. That recommendation goes to the Municipal Facilities Committee. So that's the existing committee that already decides.
But it needs the council motion to get there.
Yes, that initiates the process.
Okay. All right, and then continue with where the next steps. I'm sorry, I'm
No, it's good.
kind of
Good.
trying to really, I don't mean to take up all the question. I'm parse it out quickly so I really understand the process that's being proposed.
Okay.
So we have that fork in the road. Council decides it should be for economic development, not for a park or not for anything else.
Those recommendations go to the Municipal Facilities Committee, which is already an existing committee that does work very similar to this, focused mostly on municipal uses and not other uses. Municipal Facilities Committee makes a determination and sends that determination to council. And so then council gets to ultimately make the determination of whether a property is designated for surplus or whether it is for economic development or open space, or there's a number of outcomes that could come out of that. And then the appropriate department with those marching orders then implements.
And how do they go about implementing at that point? So the marching order at that point, in order to have the next go forward, would be the council says, yes, we want this for economic development. Department of whatever department it is that has that, or does it go to GSD, or is it whichever department owns the land? Or
If it's a surplus property, GSE would do the
surplus,
procedures.
talking about-
If it was economic development, then EWDD would basically, they would be on point for handling the city's implementation of selling the property for economic development, or leasing the property
So
for
it gets
economic
transferred
development.
from the fire department ownership basically to the EWD. In the case of our fire station.
Yeah, the fire stations were all kind of went over as a bulk. Because I don't think that GSD is generally the city's property manager, so most properties will remain in GSD's portfolio. Economic development properties do specifically go to economic and workforce development. If the property was ultimately going to be, if the decision was that it was best for an open space, then perhaps it could go to recreation and parks. And these are considered, these would be non-financial transactions. These would be transfers of jurisdiction.
But it wouldn't go to open. It wouldn't go to if it was for open space for a park, then it's going the surplus route, not the economic development. Or is that considered also economic development?
It's not considered economic development.
So the only thing that changes is the economic development.
That's the one true new capacity that the city has that we are establishing the process here.
Okay, and then what are the typical options at that point?
Well, depending on how the property, what the proposed disposition of the property was.
What's that?
Depending on what the proposed disposition of the property was, for an economic development property, I imagine economic development would solicit, and working with the council member, determine what the desired project would be at the site, solicit developers, and negotiate a development agreement.
Can I get attention for the speaker, please? If the audience could please quiet down. Thank you. Go ahead.
In the case of an economic development property, economic workforce development department is currently in the process of establishing the capacity to solicit properties to be purchased or leased by developers for development. Okay, thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question and one comment. The question is, Josh, explain how this is different from just doing an RFP on a city parking lot, for example, a city-owned parking lot, for an economic development project.
I would say there are two different stages. So I think that this is an early consideration. The process proposed here would help us make a decision very early on in the process about what's the appropriate way to go forward. And I think an RFP is a likely outcome for how you would implement. So, for example, the Wilcox-Schrader RFP. So the way that this would affect that process is very early on, we'd be able to identify if this is an additional a property that's no longer used for the existing purposes. It could potentially be reused for something else like economic development or housing, as you have there. So we could early on make the decision and assign the departments that would work towards implementing that. And the RFP is a likely way that you'd implement something like that.
So it's less of an ad hoc approach on project-based ideas for city properties.
Good afternoon, Maria Cardenas. I'm the Chief of the Municipal Facilities and Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit in CAO's office. I think one of the things that would change on this that we're very excited about is that we have more control and more information at the MFC level that, comprise of the CAO, the CLA, and the mayor's office. And we can see projects and get involved in working on them from the beginning. Sometimes we get brought in a year and a half after departments, GSD or council offices, mayor's office have been working on ideas. And I think it's meant to streamline the information. One of the recommendations, I think, also asks departments to let the unit know of projects that they have that they're working on an ad hoc basis. So it's to bring more uniformity in the information.
Okay. And then, so the recommendation is for an evaluation of city properties. Do you have an inventory? And the reason I ask that is because in another committee that I sat on, we're getting an inventory of all city properties from all departments on the ad hoc entertainment industry committee. So the city council already has sent that instruction last week or the week before. So my suggestion is to no need to duplicate or reinvent if that process is, the departments are already gathering that information, a complete inventory of all city-owned properties. Maybe that could help save some time because this evaluation, it seems, would also call for getting an inventory.
Not part of this report, part of a separate report that's still winding its way through the council system is a report that our office did on a PA study on the city's asset management systems, which recognizes that the city does not have one database, one information for of city facilities. We do not have one place. We have ad hoc spreadsheets. GSD has done a good job doing what they can, but we don't have one source, and we're recommending that the city address that as a critical issue.
So we can synthesize all this information.
Right. What we have is which we will bring before committee after it goes to MFC, is we have a tentative work program of projects that would be suitable for the economic development, workforce development department to look at, for the asset management unit to look at, and we would take that through MFC and bring it back to council.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, the Economic Development Trust Fund, how do monies from that new trust fund get expended?
So that's one of the recommendations here. So it basically is not yet completely defined how that would work. So we are asking EWDD to come back with basically program guidelines for what kind of projects could it be spent on, what's the dollar amount, what's the time limit, basically. So we'd be relying on them to develop a work program for MFC and City Council approval on how to actually administer that trust fund and how to expend.
Is there an implied nexus with the property that's being surplused, or is it generically for economic development?
We, as currently described in the report, we basically have the sale of any property, the proceeds going into a citywide economic development trust fund. So there isn't necessarily a nexus required that X amount of proceeds from a certain property be spent in a certain way or in a certain location. That's not anticipated in the report at this time.
So it really is a citywide angle on this.
As described in the,
You could have
yes.
properties on one side of the city supporting economic development on the other with the notion. And how much money what is the scale of what we're really talking about here? I mean, I don't see, at least through my district, a lot of surplus property coming through. I know there's some that happens each year, but with this, what is anticipated for something like this?
It's a good question and a hard one to answer because, as Mr. O'Farrell mentioned, we don't have the tightest rein on the city's inventory of property. But there is currently being contemplated the first exercise of the economic development disposition a property in Council District 10 that the proceeds are around upwards of $7 million. Those are segregated proceeds that have to go back to pay the SWRF, the funding source that originally acquired the property. But there definitely are properties in the city's portfolio that have considerable value. I think that the surplus properties that we tend to sell as surplus tend to be smaller properties and remnant properties. So there might be some more significant ones that we're talking about here. So I don't have a dollar value in terms of the portfolio. It's definitely something we can work towards. But I think that there could be significant proceeds to the city.
Is there any legal, like, I know that under state law there's a lot of requirements about surplus property, like Conservancy has to have the right of first refusal at the original purchase price. Will this be perceived in any circles as sort of as going around that surplus system, and does that set us up for any?
I don't believe so. As I mentioned, it has not yet been exercised, but city attorneys are confident that when they drafted the Economic Workforce Development Department, the ordinance that created that they carefully described that this is not a surplus property. This is a property for which the city will have continuing, ongoing benefits, even if it sells.
And this is for, what about DWP property?
We don't have jurisdiction over the property of a proprietary department. So this does not cover proprietaries or departments who operate their own budget and portfolios like Rec and Parks.
Great. Well, I guess, I'm going to move forward with, I'd like to move forward with this item. I know we're going to see some of the details that get written out on this. There's still a lot of devil's always in the details, and there's still some more details to be written out. But I think it's a good thing that we're focusing on economic development and how we give life to the authority that's been there for a while, but we try to do it in a thoughtful way, and particularly because it has the council backstops in this, where before this happens, it has to be a council motion on each individual property. I'd like to move forward with this item. So without objection, accept the recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now, we have a couple of items. I see one of our colleagues, Mr. Labange, is here, and so I'm going to, as a courtesy to him and his time, take up item 4 and then 5 and 6 next. And for those items, we're going to have LAFD, the CAO, and the CLA for those items, but I'm going to afford Mr. Labange the opportunity to testify first on these items and speak your piece. Then we're going to hear from the affected agencies, and then we'll move forward to try to have them come up with a written report in the future. But we want to get a verbal report now and have Mr. Labange kick it off. So, Mr. Labange, you want to present these three in order. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. O'Farrell. Good afternoon. I've been working for many years on fire station issues, trying to find sites. The proposition that has built these fire stations is now at its very end. But in the future, it's all about land. It's all about land. And the Department of Water Power has 3 parcels, parcels A, B, and C, opposite side of the existing fire station. The previous fire chief, Bill Bamatri, was very much for it, but there was successions of movements with chiefs. I just bringing it back up again. Now we have a chief who's focused and I hope will be here for a long while. And I just want him to look at it and say yes or no.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm looking it up on
If
here
you wanna-
too. What's the zip code?
Why don't you speak in the mic so everybody can hear you?
The proposed location is on Water and Power property across from Fire Station 76. It's on the east side of Cahuenga Pass. Fire Station 76 was built in 1951, and it makes it 63 years old. Currently on our list of drop-down fire stations for fire station replacements, it's at spot number 2, behind Fire Station 11. So it's pretty high on our list. And our original survey of the location, as far as response times, we believe it's a suitable location for response times. We do have a new fire stat program, and we need to run the matrix through that new program to come up with our response times criteria as far as that lot goes. Some of the other issues that we need to look at is have a Bureau of Engineering do a study on the site to make sure what the cost for utilities, sewer, wastewater, and some of those issues should be addressed before we move forward with this project.
Okay.
And again, there's no funding for a new fire station at this time.
Okay, now, you're going to have a written report for our next meeting, is that correct?
I'll work together with the CAO and have a written report.
I would just say, Chair, they can do it in the next 60 days or 90 days. Just make a true assessment, because there has been a succession of the chiefs, and then some of the period of the administration stalled because they thought they were going to be gifted a fire station from the Universal development, but Universal is being developed into a county fire station, which is on site. So just take a shot at 90 days.
Mr. Labange would like to extend, I was going to have you give this report by our next meeting, which would be in about 30 days. Mr. Labange wants to give you an extension for 90 days, and since it's his motion, I will...
Well, here, let's compromise. 60 days.
Honor
60
that
days. Let's go 60. 60, Mr. Chair. 60 days.
60 days, fair enough. So the motion then will be to get a written report on this item in 60 days without objection. So ordered.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 5.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, we're continuing items 4, 5, and 6 for 60 days.
Well, we've just continued item 4 for 60 days.
60 days,
We're now moving on to item 5. As the original instructions, I plan to have reports back for the next meeting. If the author of the motion wants to request extensions on those as well, I'm open to that, but
I think I gave them 60 days because there's multiple things I got to look at, but I can go 30 days in these next ones.
That's
Very good.
right now. I'm on 60 days for item 4, and we're going to hear item 5 first. We'll have Mr. Labange make some comments, and then the CAO will come up.
Thank you very much. Griffith Park originally was everything in its original grant in 1896, everything from Western Avenue east. Over the years in the Hollywood Hills, land development, walkaways, we've acquired parcels. I was very aggressive to acquire all this area here, which is about 300 acres, known as Coinga Peak, and also Forest Lawn just recently this year. There's additional land, because my dream, if you have dreams, and I said this when I got elected in 2001, that I want to expand Griffith Park to the west, is to go all the way and tie into the parcels that DWP is not using, as well as the county parks and recreation, and have opportunity for people to be in nature. I'm a big believer in hiking and walking in nature. At the same time, there's a parcel here that once belonged to the Betty Ford Foundation, and unfortunately, we did not capture it, but there's an opportunity now in this item, and get a report back to see what the rules are, that if we did approve a development process, the process still would have to go through, whether it's feasibility or not. If our planning department did it, in exchange, we would pick up a larger parcel of land, and this would be able to allow a loop trail in the Coinga Pass. So all I'm asking is in 30 days, if the department could look at this and planning could come back. Sid McRae is here from Recreation and Parks, and he always shakes with his right hand, but his left hand he picks up as much parkland as he can. So all I want to do is give you more land, Sid, to handle. So that's what this is about.
Great. Well, we always like having more open space for hiking and getting into nature. So, if the CAO wants to come up and make a comment on this, they're welcome. Is anyone from the CAO's office here to comment on this? No? Well, then the order of the committee will be to, I was going to say for the next meeting, but we'll give the extension for 30 days, or the next meeting, or after 30 days, whichever comes first, second, whichever is longer, the next meeting or 30 days. We'll ask for a written report on that at that time.
Thank you.
Without objection?
No objection.
Okay, so that's item 5. Now, item 6. Please read it into the record.
Item number 6 is a motion by Council Members Labange and O'Farrell relative to the feasibility of expanding and creating a new civic center in Hollywood that encompasses the area boundaries of the Longprix and Fountain, Cole to Wilcox, an area vital to the Hollywood community. We do not have any cards on this item.
Okay, Mr. Bonch, you wanted to...
Thank you very much. There were many cities which were part of the lay of the land of Los Angeles, and Hollywood was an independent city. When they were annexed into Los Angeles, there was a commitment, which was fulfilled, to build the Civic Center. The Hollywood Fire Station is there. The Hollywood Police Department's there. There was a Bureau of Engineering building. That's gone now. There is a City Hall annex that's there now. But in the future, civic centers, as you well know, in the West Valley, where you have your field office, are very important components for a community on that. I do know the CRA, which did go away, was an objective that I had to try to aggressively pursue. Basically, what I'm asking is we look at this whole parcel from Cahuenga Boulevard on the east to Wilcox on the west, from Fountain on the south to DeLongpre on the north. There is land that the city does own in there that may be part of a development deal, I hear. I don't know. I don't know any, but I think if we vacated streets, we could build a civic center. The Hollywood Police Station now is 40 years old. It was built at the time when police agencies were being bombed. There's not a window in the Hollywood Police Station. I remember the original Hollywood Police Station. It was a beautiful old ornate building, built in 1930, and I took pictures of it, Mr. Blumenfield. My hair was longer, but I took pictures of it. And some police officer who had jeans and a T-shirt came right out. His hair was longer than mine, but he pulled the film right out of my camera and said, "You can't shoot a picture." I'll show you the picture sometime. I came back another day. There needs to be civic centers. Hollywood demands it. We had a secession movement. I don't want to see that come back. It would be a great commitment to make it a civic center that's very viable. So all I'm asking is that we look at that and bring everybody together and make a judgment on this. I do believe we are a better city when we have active civic centers that work around for the 472 square miles.
Well, we certainly appreciate you pushing this item and your commitment to getting more active civic centers and engagement with the community. It's so important to making this city a great city that it is and that it will be. Do we have any comments from a CAO or CLA on this item? Again, this is, our purpose at this point. We're going to continue the item and ask for a written report, but if you wish to give a comment now.
Good afternoon, Bernice Hollins, Office of the CAO. We're fine going back and working with the involved departments to review this area to develop a rough order of magnitude for what will be required to do both necessary and desired developments in this area. However, I do want to mention that at the direction of Council, we are also leading a team to develop a comprehensive capital policy and to specifically look at the component of what our current system is of neighborhood city halls, constituent service centers, and to report back on our policy for developing those types of facilities. So we do expect to have those report backs at some point this fiscal year, probably towards the end of the fiscal year. We would have some policy recommendations, and that could have implications for how these types of projects would proceed into development.
I just wanted to comment on that situation. Land is the most important thing. We had a problem in Hollywood where we had to buy two. We took an existing parcel and another parcel to build the fire component for Fire Station 82. Land is the biggest key, and there does need to be an additional upgraded police station there in the next decade. So if you get the land, you're better off in the future. And Madam CEO, with all due respect, you're worried about the fiscal year. My whole life ends on the 30th of June, so for City Hall. So I want to get this done before.
No, we understand.
I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you.
All right. Well,
my life will go on, but I'm teasing.
I appreciate that, and we know it's very important. They're not making any more land as far as I checked.
Right, Will Rogers.
So we'd like to continue this and instruct staff to have a written report on the feasibility of this. I was going to say 30 days. You want to ask for an extension?
Well, I think we'll go 60 days, but also what I'd like to do is get the fire department building program, which I'll do. Mr. O'Farrell, you and I, the fire department, the police department, and let's just drive that area, because you're not going to get a mass of land there that could be a civic center of dynamic proportion unless we claim that. And the streets are very important. There needs to be parking, possible consolidation, et cetera, but we'll look at it. Thank you very much.
So we'll have a 60-day, Mr. O'Farrell.
I'd like to add one additional instruction, and that is with this evaluation in the next 60 days, please take a look at the feasibility costs, what it would take to demolish the existing community center and place a new fire station in its place. And
Well, the
then-
fire station's okay.
Let me finish. And then demolish the existing police station and put the Hollywood Civic Center in its place. If I said fire station, I misspoke.
Yeah.
Knock down the community center.
The existing municipal building.
Please
We
let me
have a lot of
finish.
items. Mr.
Please
O'Farrell
let
has
me
the floor.
finish.
Go ahead.
Hey, Mitch,
The existing-
I'm trying to tell you the right name of the building. It's a municipal building on Fountain.
Okay, the
6501. Remove
The
that.
municipal building is substandard and, has its issues. And what it would look like to put a new police station in that place and then replace the police station with a new community center. That's what I'm getting at, as
Got
we
it.
discussed, Tom.
But it's not a community center, it's more of a municipal building.
All right, I'm going to move on.
Thank
We've appreciate it.
Clear.
I was happy to bring these items up.
Oh, Mr. Blumenfield, thank you.
And so, without objection, is so ordered. 60 days for this item to come back as a written report. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move back now to, what items do we have remaining? Items 1,
1, 2, and 3.
what's that?
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3. Okay, no problem. So we'll hear item 1, Mr. Roster. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is item 1, Mr. Reniker. Sorry. Your top 10 is the next hearing.
You can go, Tony, if you'd
Didn't
like.
want to catch you off guard.
ITA top 10. I have the top 10 over to the right and in front of you. The first item is the ProQA replacement. At the end of the year, we had a contract that was going to expire. The ITA worked with the fire department, and we custom built and developed with the same team that developed our computer to dispatch system. We developed what we call a tiered dispatch system. This is a system that's used for call triage in Fire's 911 dispatch center. It went live at the first of the month, and so far the feedback has been good, and actually we've seen an increase in response times as a result of that application. So that project will be removed from the top 10 since it's now completed.
Great.
Item number 2 is PCI 3.0 compliance. Trustwave is wrapping up and finishing their compliance audit. We should see a draft of that at the end of December. They'll be working with the finance department for a complete set of findings and a presentation back to council sometime before March. What we've seen so far, there's an impact to about 5,400 devices in the ITA that will either be upgraded or replaced. It's a pretty significant dollar cost. The ITA right now is investigating whether we should be doing full replacement or upgrade and considering other network options that exist in the industry. So we're going to be working with a lot of our network providers, taking a look at new technologies out there so that when we do make that investment, we don't have to make it for a short term, it'll be a long-term duration investment. The city's email and desktop standards RFP, we have vendor sessions already scheduled in January. These are when the top 3 vendors will come in. They'll describe their RFP responses. We'll have a technical group that evaluates all the technical aspects. Then we'll be elevating a finalist, and we expect to come back to City Council sometime either in February or March with final recommendations going forward. As you may know, our contract with CSC for our Google email system expired in November. We have since been able to skew up and actually get discounted product through CompuCom. So we have coverage for our Google system through the end of November, and we can renew if we'd like in November 2015.
And what's the feedback been on the Google email? Is it positive, negative, or is it not?
It's been mixed, I would say, for the most part. While it was a rough implementation at the start 5 years ago, the staff have pretty much settled into it. What they have, and I think the majority of the feedback is it would be more disruptive to make a change rather than continue, and that's the feedback we've gotten so far.
Okay.
The city broadband RFP, priority 4, we actually have a workshop with GMs, with yourself, Councilman, and the Mayor's office on Monday from 8:30 to 10:30. We'll be describing the basics of the project, the commitments that we're looking for from departments. Where we've ended up right now in this project is the city departments that are impacted by permitting of assets or leases associated with this broadband effort have put together a budget package. We are calling it a digital infrastructure permitting group and a single point of contact for this effort. These are things that we learned from the RFI that industry told us we need to correct in Los Angeles. So it would be a group based on RFP responses that if we need to provide some level of free component, that there would be an offset. And this would be the offset that the city would be able to provide in order to enable a build out here in LA. The second part of this that we think is critical is the capture of assets. So we've determined through checklists that communities are using across the United States where you develop optical network facilities or above ground facilities. We've determined that the city has thousands of assets. Could be parks, in some cases it could be schools, and we're in discussions with LAUSD in this. Could even be metro rail facilities and right-of-way access there. We're taking a look at capturing and creating data sets and placing them up on our Socrata open data portal, and those would be the assets that would be listed, and we would provide in the RFP master contracts, agreements, and leases associated with the ability to access those at relatively little or no cost.
And I know we're going to talk a lot about this on the workshop and in the future, but how have the departments been about getting you the inventory updates and asset updates that you require for this project?
So we have Chief Data Officer in the Mayor's Office, Abi Namani, is actually working with us on this effort. He's been in contact with the departments, and we're working to try to get all the data captured by the end of this month so that we have the first 3 months to construct the RFP and determine if there's any nuances that need further discussion or maybe some policy changes. So far the departments have been very cooperative in this effort.
Good, because I don't want the timing to get derailed, and I know that was a big concern, and if there is any change to that, please raise the red flag right away, because it's certainly my commitment and this committee's commitment to make sure that all the departments are cooperating, that you get the assets inventory that you need, because that's a very critical part of this, of making this into a success. So
we understand. It's on track.
All right, next one.
The content management system will go live the 1st of January. So this is a content management system hosted externally in the cloud. We'll have our first 3 websites, LA City View, lacity.org, and DOT up in that environment. We're working with the Mayor's Office right now. There is a enhanced search and toolbar that we're looking to put in the top. One of the things the Mayor's Office did was capture all the Google Analytics associated with those pages that are contacted the most. So we're trying to change the navigation across all cities' homepage, bring some commonality. So when we build this template of how a web page is going to look so that departments can manage the content, we're looking at having something a little more sophisticated. We're in the process of investigating the abilities to get that done by the January timeframe. The one nice thing that this project will do, it has what is called the ability to support a responsive design. So if you have a tablet or smartphone, you don't have to scroll and use your scroll bars across in your browser. It will just automatically recognize the device you have and make it readable. So we're excited about that responsive design capability. Item number 6, we've been working with the Cyber Intrusion Command Center in the Mayor's Office. We have ordered a product from MSISAC, which is a Department of Homeland Security internet monitoring tool. So we have ordered sensors for all the departments. We've actually are going to have all internet traffic routed through MSISAC, where they can immediately notify us if there's any intrusions coming in that are known. Those that need to be blacklisted, which means we place them in our networking environments so that we block any known traffic out there that's of a malicious nature. That hopefully will go into place the first part of March. We are out to RFP right now to actually build a 6-screen 24/7 infrastructure that will be installed at the Racer Division that will demonstrate and show off both this product and other tools that we're working on with all the Chief Information Security Officers.
And when does that get all fully installed?
That should be in sometime this spring. So the RFP still has to be evaluated and awarded.
Okay.
The 311 system is still in a green line condition. It's still ready for a May implementation. Most components are already designed, and most will be built by the end of next month, which means that'll give us about 3 months to test it out fully and make sure that any corrections are made that aren't fully up to the department's expectations, but everything's looking good for the new CRM for 311.
On track with 311 2.0.
That's correct.
Good. All right.
And the last item on here, or I should say priority 8, is our disaster recovery at SwitchNap. We actually have staff that have been out to the Las Vegas facility. We've installed the network connections. We've installed the racks. Next month, we'll actually have the equipment ordered, delivered. We will be doing the installation here at City Hall, and that will all be shipped to Las Vegas so that we hope by spring we'll be able to start the initiation and test of our DR capabilities for our 5 core mission-critical products. Priority 9 is our SMS Procurement System. We actually did the kickoff for the project with a little over 300 people at Deaton Auditorium on November the 18th. It was well received, and we're on our 36-month implementation timeline. And our last item is a new item to the list. As you know, last year, or the first part of this year, we spent a great deal of time on XP remediation. Well, there's a new end-of-life system that's impacting about 570 servers in the city. It's the Windows 2003 end-of-life, which is coming up in June of next year. We think we have a good handle on that. We think the cost implications to departments about $200,000 to upgrade their old server environments to the new, and we're on a fast track to make sure that we capture that and make sure that all the departments are in compliance so we don't have any security risks.
I'm glad that's on the top 10. I don't want that one to be another sort of crisis management problem as we get to that deadline. And so if there's anything, action you need from the council to help you make that happen, make sure to let us know either now or in the future, because we want to, these end-of-life things may not be sort of sexy, but they really impact the city potentially. We want to make sure we're working with you to keep the city running properly. So
Appreciate
thank you for
that.
what you're doing.
You bet.
Any additional questions for Mr. Redeker? Okay. Thank you very much for the top 10. Okay, next we still have items 2 and 3, and then we'll go to our special. Now, call Mr. Royster to the table. On items 2 and 3, though, I just want to say we'll do sort of a brief verbal report, because originally we were going to do the verbal report in anticipation of the written report.
Okay.
It's my understanding that the written report is now complete.
Yes, sir.
But it was literally just sent to us. We didn't see it till today.
Okay.
So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it today. I'm going to continue these items until next time when we get a chance to actually read the report and
No
ask
problem.
questions about it, because we just got it.
Okay.
But I wanted to give you a chance to at least give a quick verbal overview on what they're about.
Yeah.
We'll use the next month to read them
Sure.
and ask questions, and
No
we'll have
problem.
a meeting then.
The first report, as it relates to energy retrofits, the report would cover the energy retrofit projects completed to date, the energy savings and the cost avoided, the money that we've saved, and also the kilowatts to be reduced. And also we'll talk about the financial strategies that we have put together to continue to sustain energy retrofits or energy savings over a number of years. And also the methodology and selection of future projects, what projects or criteria that we are taking into consideration to determine what facilities and what sites that we're going to implement these retrofits, and also the timeline for the completion of the energy retrofits. And in January, we can get into more details about the locations and the methodology and how we'll get to that point.
Great.
And if we also refer concerning the next motion, I think it's concerning some of the sustainability aspects of city facilities. We'll be talking about drought-tolerant landscaping, solar panels, low-flush toilets, and also as it relates to water conservation. So that report is concerning more about water conservation versus energy conservation. So on next month, we can have more details and answer any questions that you may have after you have reviewed our report.
Wonderful. I appreciate you doing the report and working on these important issues. And we look forward to working closely with you on them and reviewing the report in January. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So that concludes the regular meeting of the Innovation Technology General Services Committee and the regular agenda. And what we'll do now is we'll move to the special agenda. So without objection, conclude the regular agenda, move to the special agenda. Mr. Villanueva, are there any cards on? We only have one item. In fact, why don't you read the item into the record?
Item number 1 on the special agenda is an oral report from the General Services Department and the Los Angeles Fire Department relative to the fire near Figueroa Plaza. We do not have any cards on this item.
Thank you. And so we're going to have an oral report from LAFD and from GSD regarding the fire. A lot of times everybody's seen all the fire in the paper, but what many people don't realize is the impact that it's had on city buildings as well. So why don't we start with LAFD, if you could give us the latest update, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Assistant Chief Patrick Butler, Chief of Special Operations, and I've also been designated as the Incident Commander for the organization and coordination of resources in the city's recovery efforts and continuity of operations. Obviously, that's just a title. I'm really working with a lot of city families involved, and this is one of the mayor's highest priorities to get our systems back up and running. Current status I'll give you for today is we've had no major disruptions in service in that building. The Fire Department Fire Prevention Bureau has other satellite offices that are managing and handling the private sector and those folks that are doing business planning and plan check. The ITA, I've spoke with Mr. Renneker, the technology and the infrastructure at both 201 and 221 appear to be operational. They are switching back between different servers, and my goal tonight is keep power to the building, but we've had no major technology issues. As you can imagine, 16 floors of windows were all burned out on one side, including computer screens that are melted, but yet we're continuing to keep operations going. In terms of the workforce that's reporting today for continuity of operations, we've had several folks from the 9 different city departments that are there to either access their grant papers or anything that's really exigent to get the business operations going, permits, as well as dealing with the private sector. So from that sense, we've had great cooperation. The Figueroa Plaza building, we're basically having 4 phases of what we call the response continuum. Our first phase was the response, which everybody saw on the news. In fact, the whole world was watching. That part involved over 250 firefighters in a firefight that really saved what I would have seen just looking at the impact. Those 2 high-rise buildings could have easily had fire on multiple floors, but through some great efforts of our firefighters and the command and control, we were able to both contain basically a large bonfire with buildings that were exposed to it. The next phase will be recovery, which is what we're doing now, and getting folks in there to get their immediate needs and goods, everything including from medication or stuff that folks may have left in their office. Currently is the continuity of operations and continuity of governance, which involves us making sure that we keep our business processes going. We've been working with the CAO's office and all the other city agencies. And finally is the investigative process. Today, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive came in with their national response team, which works well with our arson counterterrorism section. They're at the scene, they will be processing the scene, and we do not have any information relative to the cause, the investigative side of it, or even speculating on any process of what may have caused it. The next phase is let's look at a phased approach of opening these buildings up so that other folks can get in there and continue on with their lives. So we're looking to get these buildings open soon. I believe Thursday was a target date, but I'm being there today. I am the incident commander. I just left within the hour, and we're starting to get some of our staff from, I believe, 221 or 222 over to 201 to begin operations there. And then finally, if Mother Nature always makes us practice here in Los Angeles, we're preparing for a large storm on Thursday and Friday with 50-mile-an-hour winds. So another effort will be how do we protect those open spaces on those buildings. So the fire department has a full, robust planning section developed. We have an incident command team out there, and we have tremendous support from all the city agencies. And it's been going pretty seamless despite, the big challenges. And I've been very supported by all the city family behind me.
In terms of the storm issue, who else is engaged in terms of getting those windows boarded up? It's not just the fire department.
Sure.
Who else is helping?
So the command post that we've established is going to have the various building owners going to be part of this, the city workforce that has some critical needs there. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to move away anything that's critical in value right now. We'll just move it to a different part of the building where we know the storm impact won't hit it. But we do have a plan. We have meteorologists on site with us, and between the building owners, city family, we're going to ensure that those buildings and those assets are protected. And of course, we're going to deploy our swift water rescue teams and all the other issues that come with a rainstorm.
What about some of the other ancillary issues with the fire, the air quality?
The air quality was monitored this morning by our joint hazards assessment team, and the particulate levels are fine for any civilian to walk in. We are issuing protective measures, N95 respirators, and we have a full site safety plan where we brief the employees and we escort them in with fire department personnel.
But you think by Thursday was the goal that they'll actually be able to reuse those buildings?
That's my understanding by Thursday. I can tell you today that in 201 the elevators do work, and we do have some of our folks in there that are managing their parts of the offices. Most of that building is occupied by the city family, so it's somewhat easier for us to negotiate with access issues. We do have a private law firm in one of the other buildings, but our project date is Thursday, and I'm sure that Mr. Royster or others here could maybe speak to the greater strategy of that.
Okay, why don't we move to Mr. I have additional questions. Do you want to move to Mr. Roy?
Okay,
and then
sure.
we can ask questions of the both of you.
The particular question was asked, the information we received from the property manager there, CBRE, that the 201 Figueroa Plaza is the location that maybe will be open on Thursday. At this time, as it relates to 221, because there's been some substantial damage, they're still continuing to do assessments. The CAO have the insurance adjusters and whatever. At this point, we do not know when 221 will be reopened. And as soon as we get the information, we'll report back to the committee when that particular timeline is available.
And who's in 221?
Mostly you have city organizations, you have recreation parks, you have animal services, you have aging, you have a floor that is assigned to building and safety. And also I think you have, the police department and also the fire department have floors there in that location.
So where are all those employees?
Temporarily, they have moved to some what you call temporary locations, and working with the CAO, the mayor's office, the CLA, we have put together some alternative long-term temporary sites for this location because we really don't know how long 221 will be not available. So we're working on plans starting right after it happened, locating city vacant space that we can put people in, and also working with our broker to locate any lease space that we need to get other departments in so they can operate as soon as possible.
So when you say long-term, we're talking 6 months?
Could be 6 months.
So this is not something anyone should expect to be back in that building in the next week or two?
No, not in 221.
Wow.
Yeah, 221 suffered some significant damage. 201, like Mr. Royster said, is a lot more accessible. In terms of the fire department, we have moved our folks to satellite offices, and the emergency management department is helping us coordinate with a lot of the recovery. I think they've even offered up office space for employees who just need to get to a terminal and do some of their business. But we've had some great organization this morning with all the employees. Any employee who has anything critical in that building or any general manager, we had a meeting this morning, and those pieces are getting handled right away. In terms of rehousing, 201 looks to be in a lot better condition for that aspect. In fact, we're moving some of our folks out of 221 into 201 just for that reason, just so they can operate out of there.
Now, and is the problem with 221, is it a safety issue in terms of damage to the building, or is it because the sprinklers have created water damage and all those other types of damage? What are the actual issues with the building?
I think at 221 you have over 300 windows that are blown out. And you have some substantial water damage where the sprinklers went off. And like I said, I think he was talking with the fire department. You have particular computer equipment that's melted and different things like that. So at this point, it's not a safe place to put people in.
Yeah, the safety issue is true. There's a lot of glass, a lot of open windows. We're doing escorts only, not to mention the water damage and the smoke damage, but it's just really not inhabitable, and you wouldn't want to have someone there for a prolonged period until we can mitigate all that. But 201 seems to be in a lot better shape.
It's not a structural issue in terms of the buildings going to fall. It's a danger issue in terms of glass and water and damage and mold and whatever else types of things are out there. Any idea of how much this is actually, damage was actually caused by this to those buildings?
We don't have the information. Possibly, I don't know. I know the CAO is working with their risk management, but I don't think any numbers are available at this time.
I know that in terms of our investigative branch, the part of our investigative branch is that we have a forensic auditor that does everything and actually lays out damage reports in terms of the investigation. So we may have a separate track, but I'm sure Ms. Huber could probably speak to other aspects of it.
Patty Huber from the CAO's office. Our risk manager was on site and actually is still on site with the insurance adjusters as we speak. So I don't have a preliminary estimate from the insurance company as of yet. Hopefully we'll have that in the next day or so. They're doing a full assessment of all of the damage that was accrued to the building. I do understand building and safety has been in there, so from a structural standpoint, they say that's fine. The issue really is going to be repairing all of the damage to the building, from the windows to the carpets that are soaking wet and other, smoke damage that occurred to the building. It is going to take time to do.
I mean, I imagine we're talking at least tens of millions.
That would be a reasonable estimate, yes. I mean, we're talking about 17 floors, each of which had sprinklers go off and has smoke damage. And then, so, it's been 2 days. It takes time to start putting all of these things together.
And you mentioned insurance adjusters. How much of this is potentially covered by insurance?
We are anticipating that the majority of it should be covered by insurance. We have a very robust insurance policy of $1 billion on the complex. It is 2 towers. We've had that commercial insurance since we purchased the building, and for clarity, the city owns the building. CBRE manages the building on behalf of the city. We have a $100,000 deductible, so we will have to put out $100,000.
And the insurance only covers physical damages.
It covers a wide range, and Victor was going to try and be here because he has more of the on-hands knowledge of all of the coverage of that particular policy. It will cover relocation costs. It will cover damage and loss costs. It covers even the fire department response costs. What other things it covers, I just don't have. Those are the ones that I know that he mentioned to me. So it is a very comprehensive policy because of the nature of that investment.
Ms. Huber, you said that we own the building. Do we own 221 only, or do we own 201 and 221?
We own both. We purchased it as a complex.
Okay, so it's one.
It's one complex with 2 towers with separate addresses.
What kind of accommodations are being made for the other tenants? And I see one representative from one major tenant of the building here. I'm just curious, because we have the other tenants that aren't city-related. What types of communication accommodations are being made on their behalf?
We have been in contact with LBBS, who is our major tenant in the 221 building. We do have some tenants in our 201 building, and we've been in contact with them and have been keeping updated on when they can come back into the facility. For LBBS, we have been in contact with them and are continuing to work with them. I believe they've also been working with their own brokers and so on. But it is a long-term issue that we're dealing with, and so we're going to have to figure out all the solutions.
And we know that several windows at least were cracked, maybe a few were blown out at the DWP building.
That is what I've heard. I've not had any conversations with DWP.
So for this report, there's no information about that aspect. What about other surrounding buildings? We know that right across the street from this one development is the other Palmer development that was further along. Were there impacts made to that as well?
Yeah, there was impacts to that building and some other adjacent properties, and we have a crew on scene right now just making sure that the main bulk of the fire is completely out, but yes, and we'll get a full damage assessment report from our investigators who are out there right now who are actually going to do an on-site survey of everything and include that in the report.
And considering that the project went up like an explosion, what role did any flame retardants used on those 2x4s on the framing? It's as though it was just kindling, and the second a flame connected, it just exploded. What are you informed on what to make of that?
Yeah. So in my career, I've responded to probably half a dozen of these type fires. And generally what happens is it's a giant bonfire. The 2x4s and the rafters and the wood they use is in basically a free burning state. It's got plenty of air. It's generally not necessarily pressure treated lumber, but if it was, it wouldn't matter, because once it gets enough heat and energy, even the hose streams you could see are sometimes ineffective. In fact, we will train our hose streams to protect the properties at times, just to let the fire burn out of fuel. So there really isn't any real fire protective measure you could do to it. One thing that we do keep an eye on as firefighters is that when a building's under construction, it's most vulnerable when it's basically in the frame stage, but once they begin to wrap it, and then it compartmentalizes. The problem with this building is there was areas that were still kind of open, so if the building's not compartmentalized, this is pretty much a standard, unfortunately, of a construction type fire. But the protection we gave to the other buildings is generally, that becomes our top priority, because if we were to train all our resources into that, then we end up losing surrounding buildings. But in terms of fire prevention and pressure-treated lumber, or what type of extinguishment systems, I think in this case, once that much fire was burning, mind you, it was across the street from a fire station, and when they pulled out of quarters, basically they had four floors of fire burning right when they pulled out. It was literally within 100 yards of the fire station. In fact, a lot of them deployed their tools from the front apron of the fire station.
So when the reports are generated that detail possible measures that can take place in the future, might that inform a way forward to enact greater safety measures during this most vulnerable state of construction, when it's wood frame construction, 7 stories tall?
Yeah, certainly. Well, one of the things we work with is the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, and they kind of set up some standards. And maybe we'll bring this forward as a best practice to say, what would you recommend to the building association? So we do that from the fire side, but there's a lot of pieces that we don't control in terms of the construction. But definitely any type of building that has potential to kill civilians or firefighters, we have a vested interest in.
And lastly, are we clear on what type of security might have been on site on behalf of the developer on a project that big? Perhaps that could have played a role. Had there been proactive security on site?
I have no knowledge of what type of security there was. I'm sure that some type of post-incident analysis will be done with this investigative team, but to answer your question directly, Councilmember, I don't know what the status of security was in that building. I can find out.
But to your knowledge so far, you're not aware of any active security on behalf of the property owner that was in place at the time of the fire?
I really can't answer that question. I do know that normally it's a requirement or an expectation, but I don't have specifics to this building at all.
Oftentimes it's a condition depending on the nature of how a project was conditioned.
Sure. So, but we could definitely find out, and the report, and the team will be here for quite a while investigating.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that there's at least some cameras that were recovered or that were streaming offline somewhere on the security that the investigative team is looking at. Are you aware of any camera footage that's out there?
Well, just I could tell you as a general rule of thumb in America, every day a civilian's on camera 78 times, and so the FBI has, so there's definitely cameras in the area, and I'm sure that our investigative team will be able to capture all that. And then we don't want to prematurely give out too much information, but yes, definitely we'll capture everything, camera footage, anything from the freeway, pedestrians, and in fact we'll probably put up a hotline through our arson counterterrorism section that will, request feedback from the community.
Right. And when you said the full report's going to be out soon, when will that happen?
Well, the investigative report takes a while because we have the ATF here. So we could probably have a preliminary report in our system by next week, but it won't go into depth of the cause. It may just cover type of building, amount of resources. But because of the investigative portion, that's the one piece I kind of want to, push away from right now.
And then in terms of following up on Mr. Farrell's question, are there particular lessons learned with this fire that we need to start incorporating? I know you're going to bring it up in the national group, but anything in particular that comes to mind?
Not at this point. It's really for us, for the fire department, we do keep an eye on construction. We do have an interactive discussion with all the different agencies. We do have the layout of all the different projects going on. So we do what's called a pre-fire plan. And so certainly this building was pre-fire planned. But in terms of some best practices down the road, we'll certainly have a discussion with the larger fire service and other agencies to see what we can do to address, especially as we see more and more construction in Los Angeles, which is good, but also maybe we direct some of our resources to how do we mitigate any risk.
How fast, a fire like, I know you said it goes up quickly, but the fire station right across the street, how fast do you think it was before, when the fire was started, before the response was there, whether you guys were notified and before it turned into an inferno? You said by the time the fire department got the word, it was already an inferno. So what is that time? Was there a fire for 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
No, so the fire resources were on scene within less than 2 minutes.
Right. 2 minutes being notified, but we don't know how long the fire
correct.
was there.
And so because it's late night, 1 in the morning, there could be obviously a delay in notification because the building's kind of secluded, it's freeway access. But I will tell you that fire doubles in size. In a minute, it could begin to double in size in itself. And once you get to 5 minutes, you get to a higher magnitude. Once the fire begins to spread at that rate, there's really not much you can do. So the fire effect is definitely fire doubles in size within 1 minute of an incident.
If it was 4 stories high, then that could have been...
Oh, absolutely. And it's very common than what I've seen. And in that case, it's really about taking protective measures to the outside. But definitely the resources were out the door right away. But in my experience, I've kind of unfortunately seen the same thing. And so it's always something to be on the lookout, especially if you live in a community that's having construction. That's something that I would tell the community is keep a lookout. If you have an active construction site in your community that's under construction, just keep your awareness up and notify us if there's any issues.
And going back to the returning employees to the departments, once the fire department gives the green light that it's okay to return, who are the other sign-offs that have to happen? GSD, obviously, before employees can return back to those buildings. Like, what's the procedure?
I think in 201 it's just fine because we have Pacific tenants in there, and the particular building owner manager knows exactly to allow back in. In 221, they would need to go through either the building manager, security, and as long as the process we have working with the fire department. But the biggest concerns more is concerning 221, which would be tightly monitored who goes up, who goes down because of the condition of the building. But 201 shouldn't be an issue.
In terms of the process, though,
in terms of to get an occupancy certificate back, is that the fire department would have to make sure that there's no hazards involved. The Department of Building and Safety would have to make sure that the building is suitable for tenants. Then we go through that process to make sure, but that's going to require that the carpets, the windows, maybe they'll portion off segments of the building that they'll get a permit to say, we're going to take this portion of the building, tag it, but make sure we have sufficient fire exits, etc. So it is definitely possible. We can definitely do things in the short term. Right now in the short term, we have firefighters there. They're getting people in their business. So nobody's being held back. That's key. There's been no frustration on the curb of, I can't get in, where everyone's going in or everyone's escorted. And we could continue to do that for the next several months, too. Just know that we can always go in and escort people.
Yeah. I think in the short term, what's really going to happen is once they flush the air system, we'll be able to open 201 and we'll be back to business as usual in that building for all the city departments that are there, as well as I believe it's the district attorney's office who has some lease space there. That will resolve itself in the next day or so. 221 is going to be offline for a significant period of time. We're looking at significant renovations that are going to be required. I don't think that there's been any determination yet on whether or not we could partition off parts of floors and let people on. I think it's way too early to really know what the answer to that is. It's not off the table, but it's not a foregone conclusion either. So we are just going to have to evaluate the best course of action on that building with all of the experts that are qualified to make those determinations with us. In the short term, we are looking with GSD, we're working with them, we're identifying city places where people can go at least have a desk, have a chair, have a computer, have a telephone, and start working again. And then we will figure out what the sort of interim, long-term solution will be until we can permanently move back into 221.
Carol, any additional questions?
No?
Then,
Any last additional comments on this?
Actually,
Go ahead.
when do you imagine you might come back and have more information? We're going to go there?
Yeah, well, my intention here is very much appreciate getting this report. It's very informative. It gets the ball rolling for a lot of us understanding how the process works. We'll probably follow up, January as well to get an update. But at this point, we will just move this report forward. It doesn't necessarily need to go to council, but it would have that option if we wanted to do a full briefing there. We would have the option to do that, and we can always call another special or agendize this in January, February. So, Mr. Villano, anything else we need to say in terms of how we move this forward?
Yeah, basically it's going to be continued in committee, and you can have it scheduled any time next month.
Okay, we can do that. We'll continue in committee. If we want to take it up in full council, we can always waive it at that point. My intention would be, as things move ahead, to potentially revisit this. Thank you all very much for this information.
Yes,
It's been very helpful. And with that, the special meeting of the Innovation Technology General Service Committee has been concluded. Thank you all for coming.